Kyle Parker was tired. Not the normal kind of tired that a good night of sleep could fix. This was the deep, bone-aching exhaustion that came from working 18 hours straight in the hot, cramped spaces of a spaceship's cooling system. He was 32 years old, and he had been a maintenance engineer on the research vessel Prometheus for almost 4 years. The ship was old but reliable, carrying a crew of 200 people through the black emptiness of space. Their mission was simple: explore new star systems and report back to Earth. Kyle's job was even simpler: keep the ship running. Today had been especially hard. A pipe in Section 7 had burst, spraying coolant everywhere. Kyle had spent the entire day crawling through narrow spaces, welding broken metal, and replacing damaged parts. His work suit was covered in chemical residue that smelled like burning plastic and rotten eggs. When his shift finally ended, Kyle wanted nothing more than to fall into his bed and sleep for a week. But his quarters were on the other side of the ship, a 20-minute walk through crowded hallways. His legs felt like they were made of lead. His eyes kept closing on their own. He found himself wandering into the emergency pod bay, a large room filled with small escape vehicles meant for emergencies. Nobody ever came here except during safety drills. It was quiet. It was dark. It was perfect. Kyle stripped off his contaminated work suit. The chemical residue was starting to make his skin itch, and he didn't want to wear it for another second. He dropped it on the floor and walked, completely naked, to a padded bench near one of the pods. The bench was meant for crew members to sit on while waiting for evacuation orders. Right now, it was the most comfortable thing Kyle had ever seen. He told himself he would rest for just 10 minutes. Just enough to get some energy back for the walk to his quarters. He was asleep before his head touched the padding. The ship's computer noticed that Kyle was in the pod bay. It logged his location, as it did for every crew member at all times. But it saw nothing unusual. Kyle often took naps in strange places around the ship. The captain had complained about it twice. The computer decided this was normal behavior and took no action. What the computer did not know was that something was wrong with Pod 17, the escape vehicle closest to where Kyle was sleeping. 3 days ago, a tiny piece of rock, no bigger than a grain of sand, had hit the ship's hull at incredible speed. It had created a small crack, almost invisible, in the wall connecting the pod bay to Pod 17. The crack was slowly getting bigger. 2 hours after Kyle fell asleep, the Prometheus entered a faster-than-light jump. This was routine. The ship did it several times a week to travel between star systems. But the energy from the jump put stress on the hull, and the crack finally broke open. Emergency systems activated. Doors slammed shut to contain the damage. And Pod 17, following its programming for a hull breach, ejected itself from the ship. Kyle was no longer on the bench. The explosive decompression had thrown him into the pod just before it sealed and launched. He hit the wall, bounced off the emergency supplies, and landed on the small bed inside the pod. He did not wake up. The human body is a strange and wonderful thing. Kyle's brain, exhausted beyond measure, simply refused to process what was happening. It decided that the bumps and noises were just a dream, and it kept him asleep. The pod shot away from the Prometheus at high speed. Within seconds, the ship was gone, continuing its faster-than-light jump without knowing it had lost a crew member. The pod tumbled through normal space, alone in the darkness between stars. Inside, Kyle snored softly. The pod's emergency systems came online. Lights blinked. Computers hummed. The life support system activated, filling the small space with warm, breathable air. A distress beacon began broadcasting on every frequency it knew, sending out a simple message over and over. Emergency. Human aboard. Need rescue. But the frequencies the pod used were old, designed decades ago when humans first started exploring space. Modern ships use different signals. The Prometheus would never hear the beacon, even if it turned around to look for Kyle. Someone else, however, was listening far away in a star system that no human had ever visited. A research station detected the signal. The beings who lived there had been watching the stars for thousands of years. They had found signals from many different species, studied them from a distance, and decided to leave most of them alone. But this signal was different. It was crude, simple, almost primitive. And it was coming from a part of space that should have been empty. The researchers sent a probe to investigate back on the Prometheus. The morning shift had begun. Captain David Brooks sat in his command chair, drinking coffee and reading reports. Everything seemed normal. The jump had been successful. They were now in a new star system, ready to begin scanning for planets. Dr. Emma Wilson, the ship's expert on alien life, walked onto the bridge with a tablet in her hand. She was excited about this system. Early scans showed several planets that might support life. "Good morning, Captain," she said. "Ready for another day of finding nothing?" Brooks smiled. "Your optimism is inspiring, Doctor." Neither of them knew that Kyle was missing. The computer had logged him leaving the pod bay during the jump, a false reading caused by the malfunction. As far as the ship knew, Kyle was in his quarters, sleeping off his long shift. It would be 3 days before anyone realized the truth. By then, Kyle would be very, very far away. The pod drifted through space, its beacon crying out for help. Kyle slept on, naked and alone, dreaming of hot showers and soft beds. He had no idea that his life was about to change forever. He had no idea that he was about to become the most important human in the history of the galaxy. All because he was too tired to walk to his room. This was the first thing his brain noticed. The second thing was that he was lying on something hard and smooth, like metal, but not quite. The third thing was that the light was wrong. It pulsed in colors he had never seen before. Colors that seemed to exist somewhere between purple and green, but were neither. He opened his eyes fully and immediately wished he had not. He was in a room with no corners. The walls curved into the ceiling and floor in a way that made his head hurt. Strange symbols glowed on every surface, moving and changing like living things. And standing around him, looking down at him with what he could only assume was curiosity, were creatures that should not exist. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, and their bodies looked like they were made of glass. Kyle could see through them, could see their insides, which glowed with soft, shifting lights. They had no faces that he could recognize. Just smooth surfaces with small openings that might have been eyes or mouths or something else entirely. Kyle screamed. The sound that came out of his mouth was loud and sharp and full of fear. To him, it was a natural reaction to waking up surrounded by aliens. To the creatures, it was something else entirely. They scattered. 3 of them fled through a door that appeared in the wall, a door that had not been there a moment ago. 2 more pressed themselves against the far wall, their glass bodies flickering with rapid pulses of light. Only one remained close, and even that one had moved several feet back. Kyle stopped screaming. His throat hurt. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He looked down at himself and realized he was still naked. "Oh no," he said. "Oh no, no, no." He tried to cover himself with his hands, a silly human instinct that meant nothing to these creatures. But it made him feel slightly better. The alien that had stayed began to make sounds. They were not words, not in any language Kyle knew. They were musical notes, rising and falling in complex patterns, harmonizing with themselves in ways that made Kyle's teeth vibrate. "I don't understand," Kyle said. His voice was shaking. "I don't know what you're saying." The alien tilted its head, or at least the top part of its body moved in a way that suggested confusion. It made more sounds, different this time, lower and slower. Kyle shook his head. Still nothing. Sorry. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The alien's inner lights pulsed in what might have been thought or emotion or indigestion. Kyle had no way to know. Then Kyle did something that changed everything. He stood up. It was a simple action. Humans do it 100 times a day without thinking. Kyle just pushed himself off the table, swung his legs to the side, and rose to his feet in one smooth motion. The alien made a sound like breaking crystal and fell backward. Kyle froze. What? What did I do? The alien was on the floor now, its lights flashing in rapid patterns of what was clearly alarm. The other two aliens near the wall had pressed themselves even flatter, their bodies almost transparent with fear. Kyle looked down at himself. He was just standing there, naked, confused, and very scared, but just standing. What he did not understand was that these creatures, who called themselves the Velith, had evolved in a world with very low gravity. Their bodies were delicate, built for slow, careful movements. The simple act of standing up quickly, using raw muscle power to lift his entire body weight, was something they could not do. To them. Kyle had just performed a feat of terrifying strength, and it got worse. Kyle's body temperature was about 37 degrees Celsius, normal for a human. But the Velith lived in cold environments, their bodies functioning best at around 15 degrees. To their senses, Kyle was a furnace, radiating heat like a small sun. His heartbeat, a steady 80 beats per minute because of his fear, sounded to their sensitive hearing like thunder, like war drums, like the approach of something terrible. And then there was how he looked. The Velith could see his muscles, the way they wrapped around his bones in layers designed for power and endurance. They could see his teeth, flat in the back for grinding, but sharp in the front for tearing. They could see his eyes, both pointing forward like all predators, designed to track and chase and hunt. To Kyle, he was just a regular guy who needed a shower and some clothes. To the Velith, he was a nightmare made flesh. The alien on the floor slowly rose, its movements careful and deliberate. It made more sounds, softer now, and other aliens began to enter the room. They kept their distance, forming a wide circle around Kyle. One of them approached, carrying something that looked like a blanket. It stretched out an arm, which was thin and jointed in too many places, and offered the fabric to Kyle. "Thank you," Kyle said, taking it and wrapping it around his waist. It was not much, but it helped. The alien who had given him the blanket made a series of gentle notes. Its inner lights pulsed in slow, calm patterns. Kyle got the feeling that this one was trying to help him, trying to make him feel safe. He would later learn that this alien's name, translated roughly into human sounds, was Harmony. And Harmony would become the closest thing he had to a friend in this strange new world. But that would come later. For now, Kyle stood in a room full of terrified aliens, wearing nothing but a strange blanket, trying to figure out how a nap had turned into first contact with an alien species. He had a feeling his life was about to get very complicated. He was right. Kyle had learned a few things during this time. He learned that the aliens called themselves the Velith. He learned that he was on a research station, floating in space around a star he had never heard of. He learned that the Velith had found his escape pod and brought him here to study. He also learned that they were absolutely terrified of him. Kyle spent most of his time in a small room that he was pretty sure was a prison cell, even though it was comfortable. The walls were soft and curved. The temperature was warmer than the rest of the station, adjusted for his body. There was a bed, a place to clean himself, and a small window that looked out into space. Every day, Velith scientists came to observe him. They stood behind a transparent barrier, watching him eat, sleep, and move around. They made notes on devices that floated in the air. They talked to each other in their musical language, and Kyle could only guess what they were saying. He tried to communicate. He drew pictures on the soft walls with his finger. He pointed at things and said their names in English. He smiled, trying to show he was friendly. The smiling was a mistake. When Kyle smiled, showing his teeth, the Velith researchers made sounds of distress and backed away. To them, he was displaying weapons. He was threatening them with the sharp bones in his mouth. Kyle stopped smiling after that. Harmony visited often. This Velith was different from the others, braver somehow. Harmony would come to the barrier and make soft sounds, trying to communicate just as hard as Kyle was. Slowly, painfully, they began to understand each other. They started with numbers. Kyle would hold up one finger, then two, then three. Harmony would respond with pulses of light 1, 2, 3. From there, they moved to simple concepts. Hot, cold, big, small. Yes, no doubt it was progress, but it was slow. Then Kyle asked for clothes. He was tired of being wrapped in the strange blanket. He was tired of feeling exposed and vulnerable. He managed to communicate his request to Harmony through a series of drawings and gestures. The Velith understood. They went away to make something for him. What they came back with was not what Kyle expected. It was armor. Heavy, thick, covering him from neck to feet in plates of some material that felt like metal but flexed like leather. It made him look huge, intimidating, like a soldier ready for war. Kyle stared at himself in the reflective surface of the wall. "This is not what I meant," he said, but he wore it anyway, because it was better than being naked. He did not understand that the Velith had designed this armor based on their understanding of human threat displays. They thought he wanted to look more powerful, more dangerous. They were trying to help him in the only way they knew how. When Kyle walked through the station for the first time, wearing his new armor, the Velith population scattered before him. They pressed against walls. They fled into rooms and sealed the doors. Some made sounds that were clearly screams. Kyle felt terrible. He tried to walk slowly, to make himself smaller, to show that he meant no harm. But nothing worked. To the Velith, he was a monster, and now he looked like 1-2. The incident happened on his 23rd day on the station. Kyle was in a large room, some kind of laboratory, being observed by a group of scientists. Harmony was there too, standing closer than the others, trying to explain something through gestures that Kyle did not understand. Then the alarm started. It was not a sound that Kyle could hear. The Velith communicated at frequencies beyond human hearing, but he could see the effect. Every Velith in the room suddenly went rigid, their lights flashing in patterns of pure fear. A door on the far side of the room burst open, and something came through. It was about the size of a large dog, but it looked like a nightmare. Its body was made of something that looked like stone or crystal, with sharp edges and jagged points. It had too many legs, all of them ending in blades. It moved fast, faster than anything that Sci should move. The Velith screamed and ran. Kyle did not run. Later, he would not be able to explain why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was because he saw Harmony frozen in fear, directly in the creature's path. Maybe it was just because he was tired of being afraid. He grabbed a metal rod from a nearby table and charged. The creature turned toward him, its blade legs clicking on the floor. It was fast. Kyle was faster. He swung the rod and hit the creature, and what he hoped was its head. It made a sound like breaking glass and stumbled. Kyle hit it again, and again, and again. The creature fought back. Its blades cut through his armor, leaving long scratches on his arms and chest. Kyle felt pain, felt blood running down his skin, but he did not stop. He could not stop. This was something the Velith had never seen. This was what humans called persistence. The ability to keep going, to ignore pain and exhaustion, to fight until the threat was ended, or the body gave out completely. Kyle fought for 4 minutes. 4 minutes of continuous violence. of swinging and hitting and dodging and getting cut and getting back up. 4 minutes that felt like hours. When the creature finally stopped moving, Kyle stood over it, breathing hard, covered in his own blood and the strange fluid that had come from the creature's body. He looked up at the Velith, who had gathered at the edges of the room. They were staring at him in absolute silence. Kyle dropped the metal rod. His hands were shaking. "Is everyone okay?" he asked, knowing they could not understand. Harmony stepped forward slowly, lights pulsing in a pattern Kyle had never seen before. It was not fear. It was something else. It was awe. Kyle did not know it yet, but he had just proven something that would change how the entire galaxy saw humanity. He had proven that humans did not stop, that they would fight through pain, through injury, through exhaustion, until the job was done. The Velith had a new name for him now. They called him the Endless One. Kyle just wanted to sit down. The Velith no longer kept Kyle in his small room. They gave him larger quarters with windows that looked out at the stars. They brought him better food, things that actually tasted good instead of the bland nutrition blocks he had been eating. They even tried to make him comfortable furniture, though their understanding of human bodies was still not perfect. More importantly, they started talking to him. The communication barrier had not disappeared. Kyle still could not speak their musical language, and they still could not make the sounds that humans used for words. But they had developed a system, using pictures and symbols and the few concepts they had managed to share. Harmony became Kyle's main contact with the Velith people. The alien spent hours with him every day, teaching and learning, building a bridge between their two species, one small piece at a time. It was during one of these sessions that Kyle learned the truth. Harmony had brought a device that projected images into the air. The alien began showing Kyle pictures of different species, dozens of them, each more strange and wonderful than the last. There were beings made of gas, beings made of crystal, beings that looked like plants, and beings that looked like nothing Kyle could describe. The galaxy, Kyle said, understanding what Harmony was trying to show him. There are many species out there. Harmony made a sound of agreement and changed the image. Now Kyle was looking at Earth, his home, a blue and green bowl floating in the darkness of space. He felt his heart tighten with homesickness. "Yes," he said softly. "That's where I come from." Harmony made more sounds, and the image changed again. Now it showed humans. Pictures and videos from Earth's broadcasts, the signals that had been traveling through space for over 100 years. Humans walking, talking, working, fighting. Kyle watched himself through alien eyes. He saw humans chasing animals across open plains, running for hours without stopping. He saw humans climbing mountains in freezing cold, their bodies wrapped in fur and fabric. He saw humans swimming in oceans, diving deep into crushing darkness. He saw humans fighting wars, their weapons growing more powerful with each generation. He saw humans doing things that, to the Velith, were impossible. Harmony pointed at the images and made a sound that Kyle had learned meant fear. Then the alien pointed at Kyle and made the same sound. Kyle felt cold. "You're afraid of us? All of you?" Harmony's lights pulsed in confirmation. Over the next few hours, Harmony explained everything. The translation was imperfect, filled with misunderstandings and corrections, but the message was clear. The galaxy had known about humans for a long time. They had been watching Earth for centuries, studying the strange species that lived there. And they had decided, collectively, to stay away. Humans were too dangerous. Kyle laughed at first, a reaction of disbelief. But Harmony was serious. To the Velith, and to most species in the galaxy, humans were monsters. They were persistence predators, able to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They could survive in almost any environment, from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. They healed from injuries that would kill most beings. They ate things that were poisonous to other species and called them spicy or delicious. They kept predators as pets. They formed bonds with dangerous animals and called them friends. They willingly hurt themselves for fun, playing games that broke bones and tore muscles, and they called it sport. And worst of all, they formed tribal bonds so strong that they would die for strangers. They would run into burning buildings to save people they had never met. They would throw themselves on grenades to protect their friends. They called this heroism and treated it as normal behavior. The galaxy had looked at humanity and seen a species that could not be controlled, could not be contained, could not be reasoned with by normal means. So they had decided to leave Earth alone and hope that humans never developed the technology to reach the stars. But humans had reached the stars anyway. And now Kyle was here, the first human to make contact with alien life. And he had arrived naked and confused and completely by accident. Kyle sat in silence for a long time after Harmony finished explaining. "So what happens now?" he finally asked. "What are you going to do with me?" Harmony's lights pulsed in a pattern that Kyle had learned meant uncertainty. The alien made sounds that translated roughly to council and decide. Kyle was brought before the Velith Council the next day. The council chamber was the largest room Kyle had seen on the station. It was filled with hundreds of Velith, their glass bodies creating a forest of light and color. At the center, raised above the rest, sat the council members. 7 Velith whose lights pulsed in slow, deliberate patterns. Kyle stood before them. Feeling small despite his armor, the council spoke, and translators tried to convert their words into concepts Kyle could understand. They were debating his fate. Some wanted to kill him, to eliminate the threat before it could grow. Some wanted to study him, to learn everything they could about human weakness. Some wanted to send him back to Earth and pretend this had never happened. And then Harmony spoke. The young alien stepped forward, lights pulsing with intensity that Kyle had never seen before. Harmony addressed the council in long musical phrases, and though Kyle could not understand the words, he could see their effect. The council members leaned forward. The crowd fell silent. Harmony pointed at Kyle and spoke more. Then the alien did something unexpected. Harmony walked across the room and stood next to Kyle, close enough to touch. Kyle understood what Harmony was saying. Even without translation, this human could have killed us. He is stronger than us, faster than us, more dangerous than anything we have faced. But when the creature attacked, he protected us. He bled for us. He fought for strangers, just like his species always does. Maybe that is what makes humans terrifying, and maybe that is what makes them worth trusting. The council was silent for a long moment. Then the leader spoke. A single word, and Harmony's lights exploded with joy. Kyle did not need a translation to understand. He was going home, but not alone. The Velith were coming with him. First contact was about to become official. 1 year since his escape pod had been ejected into the unknown. 1 year since he had woken up naked and terrified in an alien research station. 1 year since he had accidentally become the most important human in the history of the species. Now he stood on the observation deck of a Velith diplomatic vessel, looking down at Earth. He was wearing clothes. Real human clothes, sent up from the surface as part of the preparation for his return. Jeans, a t-shirt, sneakers. Simple things that felt strange after so many months in alien armor and fabrics. The ship was in orbit above North America. Kyle could see the coastlines, the mountains, the cities glowing in the night. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Your people have gathered," Harmony said, standing beside him. The alien's glass body reflected the blue light of Earth, creating patterns of color that shifted with every movement. Many of them, in many places. Kyle nodded. He had seen the reports. Every news channel on Earth was covering this moment. Every government was watching. Every person who had access to a screen was staring at the sky, waiting for the aliens to arrive. The official story had been released 3 months ago. A maintenance engineer named Kyle Parker, believed dead after a ship malfunction, had survived. He had made first contact with an alien species called the Veleth. He was coming home, and he was bringing guests. The world had gone crazy. Kyle's family had been contacted first. His mother had cried for 2 days straight, switching between joy that he was alive and anger that he had scared her so badly. His younger brother had become an instant celebrity, giving interviews to anyone who asked. His ex-girlfriend had called the space agency 17 times, demanding to speak with him. The Prometheus had been found and redirected back to Earth. Captain Brooks had written Kyle a personal message apologizing for leaving him behind. Dr. Emma Wilson had sent him hundreds of questions about the Veleth, questions that would take years to answer. And Kyle had become a legend. They called him the Naked Ambassador, the man who started first contact without even wearing pants. Every comedian on Earth had made jokes about it. Every news anchor had tried to ask about it with a straight face. Every child in every school had heard the story of the tired engineer who changed human history because he was too exhausted to walk to his bed. Kyle hated the nickname, but he understood why it had stuck. Are you ready? Harmony asked. Kyle took a deep breath. No, but let's do it anyway. The ship began its descent. Kyle watched through the windows as they dropped through the atmosphere. Fire wrapped around the vessel, but the Veleth technology kept them safe. Then the fire faded, replaced by blue sky and white clouds and the green-brown landscape of Earth below. They landed in a field outside Washington, D.C. The location had been chosen carefully, close to the centers of power but far enough from populated areas in case something went wrong. Thousands of people had gathered at the edges of the field, held back by barriers and security forces. Millions more were watching through cameras. The ship's door opened, and Kyle stepped out onto Earth for the first time in over a year. The sound hit him first. Cheering. Applause. His name being shouted by thousands of voices. It was overwhelming, almost painful after so many months of quiet. Kyle raised a hand and waved. The cheering grew louder. Then Harmony stepped out beside him. The cheering stopped. Kyle could see the fear in the crowd, the uncertainty. This was an alien. A real alien. Something that had only existed in movies and books and nightmares. And now it was standing on Earth, its glass body catching the sunlight, its inner lights pulsing in slow, nervous patterns. Kyle turned to face the crowd. He did not have a microphone, but the cameras were watching. The whole world was watching. "This is Harmony," he said, his voice carrying across the silent field. "Harmony saved my life. Harmony spoke for me when others wanted me dead. Harmony is my friend." He reached out and took Harmony's hand, or what passed for a hand. The alien's surface was cool and smooth, like touching polished stone. "I know you're afraid," Kyle continued. "I was afraid too. I woke up alone and naked in a place I didn't understand, surrounded by beings I couldn't comprehend. I thought I was going to die." He paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. Some were still scared. Some were curious. Some were starting to smile. But I learned something out there. I learned that fear is just the beginning. What matters is what comes next. Do you run away or do you reach out? Do you attack or do you try to understand? Kyle looked at Harmony, whose lights were pulsing with emotion. The galaxy has been watching us for a long time. They thought we were monsters. They thought we were too dangerous, too violent, too unpredictable. Maybe they were right. We've done terrible things to each other throughout our history. He turned back to the crowd. But we've also done amazing things. We've sacrificed ourselves for strangers. We've built hospitals and schools and systems to help the weak. We've sent food to hungry people on the other side of the world. We've run into burning buildings and jumped on grenades and donated blood and organs to save lives we've never touched. Kyle's voice grew stronger. That's what the Velith finally understood. That's why they're here. Not because we're safe. We're not safe. We'll never be safe. But because we're worth the risk. He raised Harmony's hand high. Today is the beginning of something new. Today, humanity joins the galactic community. It won't be easy. There will be problems, misunderstandings, maybe even conflicts. But we will face them together. Kyle smiled, finally not caring anymore about how it looked. And it all started because one tired engineer couldn't be bothered to walk to his room. The crowd was silent for a moment. Then someone laughed. Then someone else. Then the cheering started again, louder than before, mixed with laughter and applause and something that sounded almost like hope. Harmony leaned close to Kyle. Your people are strange. Kyle nodded, still smiling. I know. That's what makes us great. Together, the human and the alien walked forward to meet the future. Behind them, the Velith delegation began to emerge from the ship. Dozens of glass bodies catching the sunlight, each one taking its first steps on a new world. Above them, the stars continued their endless dance, no longer empty, no longer unknown, and somewhere in the crowd, a child looked up at the sky and dreamed of what might come next. The universe would never be the same. Neither would humanity. And it had all started with a nap.